Joins campaigners rallying for voting rights. Let's dig deeper into the impact some of these new laws are having. Vote.org CEO Andrea Hailey joins us now. Good to have you with us. So according to your organization's analysis, 24 million voters of color will be impacted by the new voting laws that have been passed now in 19 states across the country. What do you think is going to be the ripple effects of these laws on black and brown voters?
The ripple effects will be devastating, and in fact, that was the very intention of these anti-voter laws. It means that people will be separated from their voice and their ability to vote, that their basic American freedoms will be taken away. It means that we will have a much more difficult job as an organization at Vote.org getting voters from that process of registration all the way through to casting their ballot at the ballot box on Election Day. And again, that is exactly the intention of these laws. They're intentionally creating a system by which it makes it harder for people to participate and have a say in what happens in their local communities.
So the question now, especially if that federal legislation that Kelly just talked about doesn't go through, how do voter turnout and registration organizations plan to respond to all of these new laws? What's the strategy?
Well, Vote.org will double down on what it is we always do, which is serve the American voter. We had 39 million voters come through our platform last election cycle. We registered over 4 million voters. And then we ran a Get Out the Vote campaign that made 650 million voter contacts in communities of color and among young people. So we will continue to do that work no matter how hard it is. And at the end of the day, what will happen is that the midterms will really determine a lot for the American voter. We'll have to stand up and fight. People will have to stand in those long lines. People will have to do all these things that we know in America they shouldn't have to do to cast their ballot. But the hope here is that if Congress fails and if the Senate fails to do their job and pass voting rights legislation, that the American people themselves will have to shoulder this, put it on their back, stand in lines and fight like a generation before us did for the right to vote.
This struggle for voting rights has affected your own family. You've written about how your grandfather, and you talked about previous generations, had, quote, a grab bag of tactics used to prevent him from voting because he was black. Talk more about this family history, how it influences you, and sort of what's on your mind about all that, especially on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Yes, I love that photo. My grandfather was a World War II vet and from South Carolina, and he went abroad, fought for his country, and returned to a country that did not want to see him vote or have a say in his local community. And we can look to that history and look to the importance of voting rights. I've always grown up knowing that these rights can be rolled back at any minute and that my voice could be excluded from the process at any minute. But we don't have to go back so many generations. We can look at what's happening right now. I was born in 1981. That means I was born at a time where my vote was protected by the Voting Rights Act and by the full enforcement mechanisms of the Voting Rights Act. I now live in a day where when I cast my ballot, it is not protected by the Voting Rights Act. And I don't think everyone realizes the erosion that has already occurred and that these voting rights bills on the Hill are really an effort to just put us back to where we've been for the last generation. So it's really important. The story is personal because, you know, as a voter in Indianapolis, Indiana, I stood in 7-hour lines while being head of Vote.org. I'm not immune to voter suppression, and neither are millions and millions of Americans.
Let's quickly go back to what we talked to a moment ago, which is the federal legislation. Do you still think there is a way to get it passed, to have the filibuster rules changed and get it passed?
There is a way, and that pathway is through Senators Sinema and Manchin. You know, I think that Senator and Sinema and Manchin need to realize that this is not a red versus blue issue. This is a red, white, and blue issue. This is about the freedom of the American voter to participate in elections, period. And the civil rights movement is now the heart of the bigger democracy movement in America. What we are seeing is a slow roll of an authoritarian movement that is coming across our nation. We have to have free and fair elections. We have to make sure that every vote is counted. And the senators need to realize that we can't let a Senate procedure that is, by the way, been changed over 161 times in the last 50 years stand in the way of basic freedom for all Americans.
Andrea, thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, examining